Hi, and welcome to this Succeed with Dyslexia in-depth interview. I'm Julia Clouter. Succeed with Dyslexia has been looking very carefully at the challenges of supporting literacy for people in prisons. And it's a journey that's enabled us to speak to some fantastically knowledgeable people, and today is no exception. The title for today's webinar is Increasing Literacy Rates in Prisons, the Benefits to Individuals and to our communities. And our guests are Kerryn Huck from Shannon Trust, and Pank Sethi, who has first-hand experience of prison education challenges and pathways as a formerly imprisoned person. Hi, Pank. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Good morning.
I'm going to go through some introductions so that you can tell us a little bit more about yourselves, and then we're going to get into a conversation that I'm going to encourage us to flow with. And although I have got some burning questions I want to ask, I'm really interested to hear what you guys have got to say. So really looking forward to today's in-depth. So, Kerryn, could you please tell us a little bit about your work with Shannon Trust? And for anyone who's not heard about the work of Shannon Trust, tell us about the important work that you do.
Of course, and thank you so much for having us here today, Julia. So my name's Kerryn. I'm the Director of Operations at Shannon Trust. I've been working here for about 3.5 years now, so a chunk of time prior to the pandemic, where we were going into prisons and running our programmes as normal. And then, of course, the past 2 years where it's been slightly different and us having to really rethink the way that we run our programmes in that prison environment. So I'll tell you a little bit about Shannon Trust and who we are and what we do. So we're a charity that helps people in the criminal justice system learn to read and improve other basic skills. So a shocking 50% of people entering prison actually struggle with their reading, or they can't read at all. And so our purpose is to change that by providing people in prison with the opportunity to learn how to read. And we do that by working with other people in prison. So understanding that 50% of people in prison can't read, of course 50% of people can. So we utilise the people that are confident with their reading to support the people around them to develop those skills. We use something that we call turning pages, which is a phonics-based approach to learning to read, which has been specifically written for adults in the criminal justice system.
Awesome. Thank you for that really clear explanation, because I think it's when you're on the outside and you don't know about what's happening on the inside, it's really important just to provide that kind of overview to enable people to have an understanding of how support is happening. And that leads me to ask Pank to introduce himself a little bit more. So your expertise is as someone who has the lived experience of the criminal justice system. And I know that since your release, you have established yourself as a go-to advisor within the field of prisoner and staff education, and you've been doing some really important and valuable work, which we'd love for you to talk about, and we want to welcome you and thank you for joining us today. So please, Pank, tell us about your journey with Shannon Trust.
Thank you so much. Good morning. Whilst I was incarcerated, I became a mentor for the Shannon Trust, and I had a number of learners that I, during the whole process, taught how to read. When I was released, an opportunity came up that I saw to become, or to apply for the position of an area coordinator, which would be where I would be supporting the volunteers that would then go into the prisons to train mentors such as me. I took on that position and very quickly sort of just integrated myself, I think, into the Shannon Trust in as many ways as I could, simply because I genuinely believed that this was an organization that really did have a place in prisons today and was a necessity. As time has progressed over the last 3 years, that's, I guess my role sort of within the organization has progressed, and I was made a trustee at the beginning of this year. So sort of in 3 years, I've gone from being a prison mentor to being a trustee, and actually sort of learning so much more about the organization as a result, sort of going forward. And so for me, the Shannon Trust really is a big chunk of my life at the minute, and I certainly wouldn't have it any other way.
Okay, really looking forward to the conversation that I think will now evolve quite naturally between you, Kerryn, and you, Pank, because both of you have that conversation, inside knowledge around what motivates incarcerated individuals with reading difficulties. And this is the key thing, isn't it? To start learning to read. And I can only imagine how difficult that process might be. So I'm very interested to open the conversation to you both now, and to just help our audience to understand a little bit more about how literacy difficulties in prison causes such a huge challenge for those individuals, but also how that support network can provide a lifeline, vital support for them. So I'm going to just drop away now, folks, and I'd love you to take on the conversation.
Do you want to begin, Kerryn, or shall I?
Yeah, I mean, maybe we can pick up on what Julia said there around, what are the difficulties that arise when somebody struggles with their reading in prison. And the second thing she asked there around, the motivation side of things. I wonder if anything comes to mind for you, Pank. I've got a few ideas already in my head about the day-to-day. What's that like from your experience?
I mean, look, I think from the moment you walk into a prison, you are bombarded with paperwork. The information pack that you're given at the very beginning, literally sort of when you arrive in reception, I think obviously for somebody that can't read, is absolutely daunting. It means that they don't understand any of the information that's there unless they actually ask. And of course, many of them are not going to, simply because they're embarrassed. So from the onset, kind of they're on an unequal footing, and will start to struggle immediately. And what you find is that they either try to hide it by regressing backwards and sort of within themselves and try not to be seen or heard by anyone, or they go the complete opposite way and actually sort of become quite disruptive to hide the fact that they can't, that they can't actually sort of read anything. And I saw that on a number of occasions. as a mentor sort of for the induction team. I would be there in reception, and I would see individuals as they came in, and you could tell immediately the ones that couldn't read, and immediately, so they would be disruptive in some form, in some way, simply to get out of reading the information they were presented with and told to read. And and I think it's that challenge in itself is so daunting and so vast that I think it makes it really difficult for anyone that doesn't have the ability to read to function in any sort of meaningful way, sort of from the onset, simply because everything is covered either by paperwork or apps that you have to use, menus that you have to complete, all of it. So it just means that they can't do any of it at all.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really hard from the outside, if people watching haven't experienced prison or don't know much about prison, it's really hard to comprehend just how paper-based that world is, and how you can't do anything without filling out a form, and how information is passed under the door on a piece of paper. Everything's in leaflets and posters, and it's impossible to navigate that world without having basic literacy. And that's just your day-to-day existence in prison, without even starting to think about what you might want to do when you leave, getting a qualification or getting a job, or picking up a letter from your son or daughter, reading a book. So it's huge. And I think in normal times, it's an incredibly huge issue, but even more during the pandemic, where people in prison have been locked up in their cells 23.5 hours a day. Some people that can read have got letters from family to escape into, or books to escape into. Those that can't read, the 50% of people in prison that can't read, have got incredibly limited opportunities and limited access to information about.
Absolutely. And it's, and everything is governed by the ability to be able to read. If you want to book an appointment with healthcare, if you want to go to the library and actually sort of book some time in the library, if you want to make a complaint, contact the IMDb, whoever it might be, it's all paper-based or it's all app-based, but it does require you to read. I had a great example of an individual who was diabetic, and because he couldn't read, he couldn't order or ask to order any more syringes for his insulin. And so he was reusing his syringes, for quite some time before I found out that this is what he was doing. And it's, that's dangerous, but his own fear of people finding out that he couldn't read was what stopped him from actually asking someone for help. But, and as a result, kind of put his life in danger simply by reusing the same needles over and over again. It's terrifying, I think, for people that can't read, purely because of the amount of information that requires us to be able to read when we're in prison.
And quite often, perhaps individuals like the person that you're referring to will have gathered all kinds of life skills to be able to hide the fact they can't read, because you don't want to show that vulnerability, especially in prison. So people are quite well established at hiding the fact they can't read and doing things to oh, I forgot my glasses today,
yeah.
Or oh, I'll sign that later. It can be really difficult actually to spot people that can't read if they've gathered those life skills to be able to hide that.
Yeah, and it's incredible, just how many would struggle, and certainly would need to read legal papers or write to their lawyers, and not being able to do that would put so many of them again at, at a disadvantage. And you're right, they would use. I heard so many different excuses. Oh, do me a favor and read this just while I tidy up this, kind of, and those kind of things. It is amazing, the excuses that people will come up with.
Yeah.
And I think, in the real world, they're the excuses they've used for however long they've managed to hide it for. But it gets to a point, I think, in prison where you just can't hide it, simply because you can't function properly, or you get taken advantage of if you don't actually then engage or try to make an effort to try to learn how to read.
Yeah, and there's good reason why people hide it, through fear or embarrassment or not wanting to make themselves vulnerable. As you say, eventually it's a skill that everybody needs. So one of the questions Julia asked us was around motivation. Now I know from our work at Shannon Trust, there are so many motivating factors that prompt people to want to start learning to read. Often it's the here and now. Like they want to read what's on that bit of paper, or they want to choose what they're going to have for lunch and be able to understand what's on the menu, or they want to read a letter from their kids. Normally it's around, I just want to function right now. I want to be able to navigate this world, or I want to be able to read a book to my kids. Often family is a huge motivator. I want to help my kids with their homework. My kids are learning to read and I want to do that with them. What are some of the motivating factors that you've come across that really inspires an adult in prison to take that leap?
I think the ones that you've mentioned, certainly, kind of wanting to be able to read to their children, or read something that their kids have written to them, to be able to write to them themselves. But I think especially not everybody has the luxury of having money sent in when they're in prison. And so the only way that you can actually purchase things on the canteen, etc., if you work. And a lot of prisons now won't allow someone to work unless they've actually completed at least a level 1, if not a level 2 in English and maths, in functional skills. And so that becomes quite a big motivator, because without that, people can't then go on to work. And whilst, you're only earning pennies, really, I think the average is about 10 or 11 pounds a week, kind of a prisoner would earn. That can make a big difference when it comes to actually ordering little luxuries, whether it's a bit of extra food, or whether it's, saving and buying yourself a stereo so you can listen to some music. So those things are motivators, and they do drive people to actually want to learn how to read. I think, as well, they see, with a lot of the learners that I had, they saw how everybody else functioned, and the things that they were afforded as a result of doing certain things which required them to read. And so, for example, with myself, I was an education mentor, so I would teach functional English and maths from an entry level all the way up to level 2. As well as then, degree courses that they had running at the prison. Because of that, because I was engaged with the Shannon Trust and I was a mentor for that as well, it allowed me to get a red band, which gave me the freedom to move around the prison, to see people when I needed to see them. It allowed me to go and sit out on the grass in the sunshine rather than be stuck on the wing. And so people see that and covet that. They want that themselves. And so that can be a great motivator and driver to get people to engage, because they want those things as well. And the only way they'll get those is obviously if they engage and are able to do those things. Every time you complete a course or gain a qualification, kind of the teacher, for example, would put a positive entry on your nomis, and that all counts towards recategorization. So if you are trying to get to an open prison, having as many positives as you can on your noms will always help. And so that is absolutely a definite driver, in getting people to engage, simply because it will allow them to actually get further on in their sentence and hopefully get to a decap prison.
Yeah. So for those watching, a nomis is the computer system where they record what's going on with each person in prison and their behaviour, etc., and help them move through the different prison categories. I think there's also the longer term motivations too. So I know that people coming up to the end of their sentence start thinking about life on the outside, life on release, start thinking about, well, actually, I am going to have to get a job, or I am going to have to do whatever it is that they hope to do when they leave. And reading is going to need to be a part of that, even down to reading the letters from probation to make sure you get to the appointment on time, all the way to getting the job that you really want to have, or achieving whatever goals that you've got. So I know for a lot of people it's the here and now, definitely, but it's also that long-term vision of, actually, I'm not sure this is the path that I want to keep walking down. And actually, I think perhaps I'd like to take this path in life, and reading's going to have to be step one to take that path.
Yeah.
Be able to live in a different way.
Absolutely. I mean, the one thing that every prisoner is expected to do is to actually sort of fulfill their sentence plan. That you would sit down and actually go through with your offender management officer. And, let's say, for example, it could be engaging with drug and alcohol services, or with, the affiliates that run, the work with gang members and things like that. So, and you can't do any of that unless you actually engage. And a lot of that does involve reading. It does involve writing. Engaging with CRC services, which help you to write out a CV and actually sort of apply for jobs for when you leave, things like that. Again, you can't do any of those unless you're actually able to read, and they don't necessarily accept somebody doing it for you, and typing out that CV for you. The number of courses that, whilst they have reduced in prisons, the ones that are available, do require you to actually read to get those qualifications, so you can then apply for those jobs. You're going to need to actually be able to access the course material, which again, involves that people having to read. So, they really are motivators when it comes to not just the actual time that you spend in prison, but what happens afterwards when you are released, whether it's opening a bank account, ordering a national insurance number, things like that. They're all forms that have to be filled in. And while somebody can sit there and go through them with you, you need to be able to understand what it is, or what information it is that's being asked of you, so that you know yourself. And the best way to do that is being able to read it yourself.
I think what's shocking to me, just building on what you're saying there are so many support services in place for people in prison to change their behaviour, to reduce reoffending, to take a different path in life. There's drug and alcohol support, there's courses and programmes around offending behaviour and around challenging that. There's all kinds of employability courses, there's all kinds of qualifications and coaching and mentoring. There's so much opportunity there for people to engage with. But for those 50% of people that can't read, all of those doors are closed, because you can't even open the door if you don't know how to fill in the form. So it's immediately excluding 50% of the prison population from engaging in all of those different opportunities and taking a different path in life.
Yeah, I mean, let's not get it twisted. Sort of at the end of the day, yes, these services are available, but are they perfect? Absolutely not. Have they been reduced over time because of sort of cuts that the government has made? Absolutely. But yeah, you're absolutely right that if you can't read, all of those are unavailable to you. And there really is no other way for anyone that is unable to read to actually access any of that information, to be able to actually engage in any other way. And that, I think, is what needs to change, certainly. And of course, we do our bit, sort of as the Shannon Trust, and help as many people as we can to start that journey. And of course, we see that it works, and it absolutely does work. But I think there obviously needs to be more sort of integration by other departments or by the prison service itself in order to be able to cater for those that are at that stage of their journey, and not just assume that everybody is able to be sort of literate to a level 2 or a level 3 sort of stage. And I think that's something that kind of, if it were available, would make a massive difference again to a lot of the prisoners, and the way they see themselves, and the opportunities that they then see that they may have going forward. Yeah. So otherwise, it is, I think a lot of them do sort of think that everything is closed up to them.
Yeah, and I would love the people watching this webinar to have a sense of, I guess my sense of our learners is that it's not a lack of motivation. I can see so much motivation from our learners. They want to be in touch with their family. They want to be doing the courses. They want to be getting a better job. There are so many motivating factors. It's actually a lack of self-belief that holds a lot of people back, because maybe they've tried before and it didn't work out and it's knocked their confidence. Maybe they don't trust education, or they don't trust learning in that way. They don't think they can do it. Or it's a lack of opportunity, that they've just not had the opportunity given to them. I'm thinking specifically about one learner in my mind who she had a difficult childhood. She was placed into care very young, and then that had a ripple effect on her experience at school. She was in and out of school. She got eventually expelled, aged 12, and then found herself in a life of crime, ended up in young offenders institutes, prison, etc. And what opportunity did she have? She was 12 years old when she was expelled, and she had lack of support. She didn't have mum and dad sat down singing the alphabet to her, picking up a book, reading at bedtime. She had a completely different experience than probably most people watching this today. She did learn to read in prison. She engaged with Shannon Trust. She did have the opportunity. She's now doing a master's degree and she's flying, and it wasn't a lack of motivation or a lack of intelligence or a lack of anything on her part. It was a poor start in life and a lack of opportunity. And that's just one of 100 stories that I could tell about our learners that demonstrate it's not that somebody's being lazy or being unintelligent. It's that they've had a difficult start, and it's our responsibility to make sure that when there's...
Yeah, and I saw that too. One of the prisons that I went to used to be a young offenders institute, and they turned it into a regular CATC, and I was one of the first sort of group of more mature men to be sent over to help calm the population down, I think, really. And what I noticed immediately about them was, considering that I just kind of thought to myself, kind of as an almost 50-year-old man, what on earth am I going to have in common with, sort of anyone that's 18 to 21? And immediately there was a sense of respect there for you, and I was never once, I think, called by my name. I was either, you call you uncle out of respect, or I was, my nickname, which, followed me throughout my entire sort of prison sentence, was Papa Smurf. And what I found was that here were individuals that clearly were highly intelligent, but hadn't had anybody believe in them. And the moment you start showing them a little bit of belief and encouragement, and sort of say, hey, look, you can do that. I think that's a great idea. Things like that. You saw how they suddenly changed and how they then wanted to engage. And, and I had learners that were like that really had been absolutely disruptive. Ones whose families hadn't come to see them for a number of years simply because they didn't recognize their own son, and refused to believe that the person that was there was their son. And suddenly they would change, they were more motivated. They were far more engaging. And, and there was a great example of one of them who he was dyslexic. It was evident, I think, that he'd always known that he was dyslexic, but he really had no support going forward, you know, sort of throughout his school life. And he engaged with the Shannon Trust. He engaged in the Learners Program, started to, you know, work his way through the books. We were in English together. You know, I was teaching him in English. I'd take him out of that class for 20 minutes every session, and we'd go into a separate room where we'd actually sort of, you know, go through the books. He was far less, you know, sort of disruptive once we had begun. But I got to see, by having these conversations with him as we were doing the program, just how intelligent this guy was. And so when the opportunity arose for one of the universities to come in and actually do an extended project qualification with the prisoners as well, where the university students would come into the prison and we would all be taught together, the course they wanted to do was a philosophy course. There were 12 spots, you know, for prisoners. And I actually said to the head of education, I really think that he should be one of those 12, even though he can't read. And if he wants to do it, I'm happy to write what he dictates for him. I'm happy to actually sort of, you know, kind of put it into an order for him, but I don't think that he should be discounted simply because he isn't at that stage yet to be able to write an essay, you know, sort of formally himself. And they really, they did and ah about it for a bit. They spoke to the university. I spoke to the head of the course that came in and put my case forward as to why I believe that he should. And they decided to give him a go. And what he produced as his question, his philosophical question, the research that he sort of, you know, kind of asked to be done on his behalf, and what he actually sort of dictated, what I wrote out and typed out for him, was absolutely incredible. And without a doubt, he has the ability to become one of today's modern philosophers, greatest modern philosophers. I genuinely believe that. You know, and all of that would have been completely and utterly ignored or missed had he not actually sort of engaged in Shannon Trust to begin with. And, you know, and it just shows how powerful I think sort of the organization can be by allowing, you know, sort of those people to really understand their own abilities and their own goals the moment they start to actually engage and get that confidence in wanting to learn.
I think that's a really important point, specifically for this webinar around, you know, that individual had dyslexia. This is Succeed with Dyslexia, to help the audience understand why this is so prevalent. Why are there 50% of people going into prison that struggle with their reading? The data on this is shocking. If you've got a learning difficulty or disability, such as dyslexia, you're 3 times more likely to be expelled from school. And then once you've been expelled from school, you're 4 times more likely to end up in prison as an adult. So this is why you've got such a high number of adults now moving into the prison system, because perhaps that learning difficulty wasn't picked up or wasn't supported effectively enough at school. So you've got 3 times more likely to be expelled. Then you're expelled, you're 4 times more likely to go to prison. And as a result, there's somewhere between 30 to 50% of people in prison today with a learning difficulty or disability. And those are all people that have had, their needs have not been met at school age, and they've ended up in this situation now where, you know, the opportunities for support are much less.
Yeah, I think sort of, you know, kind of historically, I think prisons have not really cared about whether somebody has dyslexia or has a disability, whilst, you know, sort of there, you know, everyone is covered under the Disabilities or the Equal Opportunities and Disabilities Act, etc. You know, kind of it's all of that is ignored in prisons. It really is. And, you know, to a certain degree, it, you know, kind of, it was such a huge frustration for me when you kind of think, well, what is the point of having it if you're not actually going to adhere to it and be so blatant about not adhering to it? But when I think when sort of, you know, kind of individuals come along, such as myself and certainly some of the other mentors that I worked with who were equally as I think vocal about sort of, you know, people standing up for each other and as peers, you know, sort of becoming a unit where we did support each other. You know, you did notice that difference, and sort of, you know, and I think just with dyslexia, you know, I mean, it was the fact that it can be as simple as using just a colored piece of film over text which stops the word swimming around. It makes such a massive difference. And something as simple as that, as this flimsy little piece of material, can have such a profound difference on someone's life. And it's amazing, sort of, kind of how many people still don't realize that can help. It's amazing how many individuals, go through life with dyslexia, having been told from an early age that they won't amount to anything, that, they're dumb or they're stupid or whatever it might be. Sort of the fact that has had this ingrained effect on them, and where they go from there and what they do. I think it is quite cruel, and it's something I think that the society as a whole needs to really actually sort of get a grapple on and understand that by saying something like that or doing something like that, by not supporting those that have dyslexia, which is a disability, and just because it's not physical or can't be seen, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. What they're doing is they're depriving, so I think that, society as a whole, our country as a whole, of some of, what can be the greatest minds out there. Mm-hmm. And, and I think to miss that, is the same as burning down a library, that, kind of that knowledge that they have or that they can bring to society as a whole, I think is really, it's just criminal to actually allow that to be missed simply because they haven't had that support either in schools or certainly as they go into the prison system. And I'm glad that we're able to actually highlight that and support them in that way, especially considering how historically they wouldn't have been.
Yeah, I feel like times have changed. We talk now about neurodiversity, neurodiverse conditions, which with much more ease than people did 10, 15, 20 years ago. There's a lot more knowledge and understanding around learning difficulties and disabilities now, a lot better understanding and communication around dyslexia, and there's a better public awareness of those different challenges and different ways of thinking. However, everybody that was at school 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years ago, they've missed that support, and they are now in adulthood trying to catch up and trying to engage in those different opportunities. So I am hopeful that, in the future, this won't be such an issue, but there still remains those adults or those young adults that require support today.
Yeah, and it breaks the cycle, because those adults, a lot of them have their own children, and obviously, they're not able to support their kids in the way that they perhaps want to or should, and kind of by doing what we're doing, by the fact that knowledge is out there, the fact that there is more, there is a greater understanding. Yes, it helps to break that cycle, but I think there's still quite a long way to go, and I think sort of this is where everyone has to actually take responsibility. We, as a society, are a collective, and we are only as strong as our weakest member. And truly, sort of, if we want to actually continue to go forward and to evolve and to become better people, which, let's face it, we all want, we have to all do our bit. And that means understanding that individuals that are in prison are there not necessarily just because of the crime they have committed, but because of the circumstances that led them to actually commit that crime to begin with. And a lot of that comes down to the inability to read or having access to resources or to groups that are able to help them and understand the disabilities that they may have.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's hard for somebody that hasn't had those opportunities, hasn't had that support as a child, and has built loads of other coping strategies and different ways to move through life without those skills, to then suddenly, as an adult, go back into a classroom and open up a book and make themselves vulnerable and feel, worried about what the teacher might say or what other people might think about them. I think our approach hopefully challenges that, being more informal, being more peer-led. I feel like it's as important to focus on the confidence building and the relationship and the trust as it is to actually focus on the mechanics of phonics, the actual reading bit. I find it humbling, or I found it really humbling, sort of that I mean, if I think back and just try to put myself in that situation, how would I feel?
sort of walking into a classroom and being asked to sort of read something on the board and not being able to do it. I mean, the terror that anyone would feel, I think, is really quite overwhelming. And so I think the strength that actually comes in saying to somebody, I need help, sort of, and I want to learn and I want to engage. That in its, I mean, that's what I find quite humbling, the fact that these individuals and these learners have such strength in, to actually admit that to begin with, to start that journey, and, and don't necessarily realize that they've got that strength, and that to actually admit that to begin with is such a huge deal, and something that they should be proud of, so simply because they're making that change, they're doing something to change their circumstances and to actually get out of the situation that they're in. Yeah. And if somebody does that and wants to do that, then absolutely 100% they should be supported in every possible way.
Absolutely. Before we invite Julia back in for another question for us, I thought perhaps it would be nice to paint a picture of what it actually looks like to learn to read in prison. So there are no classrooms with Shannon Trust. Yes, formal education does exist in prison. And so people that aren't aware, there are classrooms in prison. There are workplaces in prison. It's much more than what you see on the telly. There's a whole world in prison. But the way that we approach learning to read for adults is completely informal. So you have a mentor, which could be somebody that lives on your wing, and you sit down with a book together. And that might be in the gym. That might be in the library, that might be in the garden, and it's informal, and it can be 20 minutes, 10 minutes. How are you doing? Do you want to do a couple of pages together? A lot of positive reinforcements, but always focused on the learner, how much they want to do, how often they want to learn, how fast they want to go. If they want to repeat something, it's all completely learner-led and adult-led, and learner choices at the heart of everything that we do. So the learner chooses what their goal is. It's not for us to say, right, you're going to do this, and you're going to go and do that exam, and you're going to go and get that qualification. We ask the learner, well, what do you want to do? Why do you want to learn to read? I want to read a book to my daughter. Okay, that's goal one. Let's get you there. And then you've achieved that. Brilliant. What's next for you? Well, actually, I'd like to write my first letter. Okay, that's goal number 2. Let's go for it. And that's how, in practice, it works. And then eventually, our hope is the confidence gets high enough that that individual does feel confident to step into the classroom and open a book or go and get a qualification or a job. But the informal aspect of what we do is really at the heart of trying to overcome all of these challenges that we've talked about so far.
Yeah, I agree. It's sort of, it really, the informality really does make a massive difference. When you take them outside of that traditional setting of sitting at a desk, sort of with a teacher standing in front of you, kind of a piece of chalk and sort of, kind of looking down, you going, all of that disappears and they do become a lot more relaxed. I was very fortunate at one of the prisons that I was at that the governor was so supportive of the program and really did allow us to do as much as we possibly could to have people engage with us. And so within the education department, there was a separate room that was empty that I basically took over. I, kind of had to redecorate it. I had couches put in there. It didn't have traditional tables or anything like that at all. And that was just known as Papa Smurf's room. And that's where I would take the learners, when we'd have the 20-minute sessions there, and then they'd go back to the classroom. On the wing, we had, it was a room that was just used, before I got there, was just used to store stuff. And again, so we had it completely removed. We had it painted, couches, and that became the mentor's room. And so, you could only go in there if you were a mentor. But it's where we would take either new inductees or I'd take, sort of the learners would sit down on our couches. There was a television there, sort of, with the Shannon Trust, obviously we had the CDs and things. And so we were able to use the television, use the DVD player for things like that if we needed to. And it gave us another space again that was outside of that traditional sort of classroom setting. And it makes a massive, massive difference to the way that they actually engage.
Have absolutely absorbed everything you have been saying, and it is fascinating and so important, this learner-centric pathway that you are encouraging people to go through and putting them right at the heart so that their decision making enables them to flourish through the Shannon Trust programme with the support. You touched a little bit earlier on society and how outside perspective the views of people can affect learning and life chances for people in prison, and also for people when they leave prison too. And I'd like you to explore that a little bit more. And then I'd also like to hear more about how the Shannon Trust can influence change for prisoners.
Well, I mean, if I jump in first, Pank, I think people watching this are going to have their own views about prisons and people in prison. And I'm not here to change the minds of anybody watching this webinar today around their views of prisons. And that's probably a much longer conversation for another day. But if we were to set aside the politics of prisons and just focus on the people, I think that all of us here and everybody watching could agree that somebody leaving school aged 10, 11, 12, being expelled, not being able to read, that's not okay. And that's something that we need to change collectively as a society. And then I would extend that, of course, to the children that have grown up and become adults that can still not read. The people that have had learning difficulties and disabilities that have been missed, support that hasn't been in place. So my view is, if you're in prison or not in prison, absolutely everybody deserves the opportunity to learn how to read. And I suppose, if we're talking about this at a societal level, my sincere belief is that when we invest in education in prison, absolutely everybody benefits. So the person in prison benefits, they get new skills, they get to grow as a person, they get to develop new ideas and interact in a different way, and potentially take those skills on a new path. Their families benefit, they're able to read to the kids, receive letters from their families, maintain connection. As Pank said earlier, that intergenerational cycle of illiteracy is broken. And then, of course, the rest of society benefits. It's a proven fact that education in prison reduces reoffending. So it's a win-win situation. When we invest in people in prison and we invest in education, we will all feel the ripple effect of that, and we will all benefit. And our communities will be safer as a result. Pank, what's your sense on this?
Yeah, I am absolutely. I agree. So I think kind of obviously the community has this perception of what prison is and what prisoners are, how it is inside, and what happens. And the reality is very, very different. So what the media will tell us happens in prison is such a tiny percentage of what happens in prison that it can't really even be classed as being representative, because it's not. So we're fed the negative stories because, of course, people want, I suppose, they want it so that we fear going to prison. It has to be a deterrent. But the positive stories are never really reported in a way I think that they should be. Sort of instances, for example, such as one of the learners, going on to do this university course, in philosophy with a well-renowned university, and actually flourishing doing it. The fact that we had, for example, a debate team, and we had debates against Oxford University students, Cambridge University students, that were hosted and sort of, and presided over by well-known and well-respected judges. And the fact that, the prisoners themselves won these debates using traditional debating rules and ways of debating. These things aren't really reported. And if people understood better, sort of what happens, I think there would be more support. I think at the heart of it, everyone needs to understand that if somebody engages in education, and that includes, sort of the reading program and the learning, sort of the learners that we have, they want to learn, they want to change their lives, and they want to do something to better the circumstances that they find themselves in. And that should be supported, it should be championed, it should be applauded that they are trying to do something to change their circumstances.
Yeah, I would agree. I saw a statistic the other day, which I'm not going to remember, so I'm not going to try and quote it, but it was something like 90% of people in prison do not want to reoffend. So these are people that are looking for the opportunity to do something different with their life. So going back to what you said earlier, Pank, about us being a collective society, I suppose it's that collective responsibility to own, actually, perhaps some of these people in prison have been let down by society, and it's our responsibility now to step in and provide opportunities for change at this point in their lives.
Yeah, and I think when you look at the demographics of the learners, sort of, certainly that I had, for example, there are certain sort of sections of certain demographics that you perhaps sort of you found more as learners that engaged. The traveller community, for example. Now, kind of culturally, for them, education is not something that was important. Getting out there and working was more important, and so you find that a lot of the learners that I had, were from the traveller community, and I think that the community as a whole and society as a whole has a very just succinct idea of what travellers are, and what, if anything, they bring to society itself, and it's such a huge misconception, and it's one that I think sort of would change if they really understood the challenges that they themselves face and the reasons why they aren't engaged or aren't able to read, aren't able to sort of kind of go to school or get these qualifications that they need, and sort of having spent time with them, having actually helped them to learn how to read, they are some of the most incredible people I've ever met, and sort of so welcoming and so warm, and it's such a different side of what we're shown, or what we see, or what we perceive to be real. And it's the same with other demographics, sort of. You find a lot of foreign nationals, obviously, sort of struggle to read and write English. It's not their native language, but that doesn't mean to say that they don't have anything to offer.
Yeah, I'm agreeing. I'm thinking about what you're saying about what we see in the news about prisons, and that's not my experience of prisons. My experience of prisons through the Shannon Trust has been award ceremonies, people getting the first ever certificate they've achieved in their whole life at the age of 50, because they didn't achieve those at school, or they didn't have the opportunity to have those at school. And they're holding their Shannon Trust Turning Pages certificate with so much pride and so much celebration in the room. It's those things that we don't often see. Yes,
completely. And sort of, one of the prisons that I was at, they understood that, of course, sort of that every prisoner needed to have qualifications in order to be able to progress. If somebody wasn't able to read, the chances of them actually sort of getting to a level 1 or a level 2 English before the end of their sentence was something that was probably unattainable. And so, kind of the agreements were made that if they engaged with the Shannon Trust program and they started to learn how to read, they could sit a basic sort of English entry exam, and if they could do that, they would then be released from education to then be able to actually go out to work. And again, so to be able to get a formal qualification, regardless of whether it was a level 2 or whether it was an entry level English, sort of a qualification, it was a qualification nonetheless. And the pride that comes with that, the joy that comes with that, is something that that you just really don't see out in the community, and it really isn't reported. And these things are so important because it's evidence, physical evidence, that the prisoners are doing as much as they can to get themselves out of those situations, to not reoffend, to not go back, and want to actually make a difference, not just in their own lives and for themselves, but for their families and for their loved ones as well.
Yeah, it has a big impact on somebody's personal identity, doesn't it? I know that I hear from learners, but also mentors too, that you can be labelled an offender or a prisoner or whatever label it is, but actually learning to read, getting that certificate, you can start to see yourself as a learner or a student or a graduate or an employee. And I hear that from mentors as much as I hear that from learners, that actually there's a real sense of identity that shifts when you start to move in that way.
Yeah, I think it's sort of, and it's there is this, again, there's this idea of what a prisoner is or what a criminal is, what somebody that goes to prison looks like or sounds like, and that has changed completely, sort of now, and I've seen it myself. There are people in prison Sort of educated people such as myself. There are doctors, lawyers, pilots even that I came across. Sort of these are individuals that you wouldn't necessarily expect to see in prison, but are there. And and it's challenging that perception of what a prisoner is, or what and how they should be sort of received or perceived when they come back out into society, that I think we have to change. And the best way for somebody to be able to do that for themselves is to be educated, is to be able to actually stand up for themselves and say, actually, you're wrong, and be able to back that up with facts and figures, which of course they can do if they're able to read.
Yeah, and the fact that whoever the person in prison is, they deserve that opportunity. Because I think often there can be a sense of, well, perhaps they don't deserve that because they're in prison, and this sense that we should be focusing our resources on different segments of society. But there's enough to go round, and there's enough opportunities for everybody.
If the audience would like to support with Shannon Trust volunteering, fundraising or campaign work, how can they do that?
Yeah, thank you. You'd be really welcome to get involved. So whilst we're in every single prison in England, Wales and Northern Ireland, we're a small organisation. So at the moment, we've just got 13 staff members, but we've got an army of 150 volunteers. So if you've got skills or time that you would like to volunteer to the organisation, you'd be really welcome to join us. If you go on our website, click on the volunteering button and you'll see all the opportunities there. But if you've got a particular skill set that you'd like to support us with, just get in touch, drop us an email, and we'd be really happy to hear from you. So we're a charity, and if something that we've said today has inspired you in any way and you have the means to support us financially, there are lots of different ways that you can donate or get involved in our fundraising activities. Again, go to our website, click on fundraising or click on donate, and you can find out more. And finally, the main thing that everybody can do that's been watching today is to help us raise our profile. So you may not have heard about Shannon Trust before today, maybe you have, but we'd like to get more people knowing about the work that we do in prisons and in the community. So tell people about what you've heard today, tell them about our work, let them know about the size of the problem in prisons, and let them know about some of the ways that we're trying to make a difference. All of that will really help us break the stigma, and it will help us provide more opportunities for more people in prison so that nobody's left out of learning.
If you've enjoyed this Succeed with Dyslexia in-depth interview and you're interested in literacy issues and their impact on vulnerable people, I'd encourage you to also look at my conversation with David Breakspear, formerly incarcerated person and now an influential prison reformer. And we will be discussing the prison pipeline and how lack of literacy contributes to prisoner vulnerability. Or you might want to look at my in-depth discussion with Kat Goodacre, a researcher with profound insight into how we can support vulnerable adults, including people leaving the prison system. Succeed with Dyslexia produces blogs, news, learning festivals, and reading campaigns. Please do explore our content.
Thank you so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed this video as much as we did putting it together. Now we have some more fantastic content for you. Please feel free to click this link here and learn more about Roger Broadbent and some of the strides he's making to put dyslexia support at the heart of education. If you have any comments or questions, leave them in the comments below. And as always, thank you so much for watching.